How would you feel if, after 20 years of marriage, your wife suddenly started paying too much attention to her appearance? I'm not talking about rare trips to the salon or changing perfume. No, that would be natural. I'm talking about a sharp, almost obsessive fascination with one's appearance that was not there before. Imagine a woman who has always preferred comfortable jeans and soft, stretchy sweaters all her life suddenly appears in front of you in a tight dress that emphasizes every line of her body. Her hair, which used to be just pulled back into a messy ponytail, is now styled to perfection at the salon, with a new cut that looks like it was chosen after a lot of thought. She wears makeup every day, not just touching up her eyelashes, but spending time on full makeup, which previously seemed like a waste of time to her. The mirror, which previously served only for a quick glance before going out, now occupies her attention for many minutes. She turns in front of him, studies her reflection, straightens her hair, evaluates her curves, tries out different poses, as if getting to know herself all over again. Things appear in her closet that you have never seen before: elegant blouses, tight dresses, heels, instead of the comfortable sneakers that were once her only choice. And shopping. She never liked shopping. She always preferred to buy something quickly and to the point. But now she returns home with full bags, looking at new things with some special sparkle in her eyes, sorting through the fabric as if it were not just clothes, but something more, something important. Expensive creams and perfumes, which previously seemed to her an unnecessary luxury, are now lined up on her dressing table. You look at it and try to understand. What has changed? Why now, after 20 years, did she suddenly decide to start this transformation? Is it just a desire for change? Or something else, something that makes you wonder why she's suddenly so desperate to look different? There was also a gym. Becky never liked working out. She always thought it was a pointless waste of time. She said that, and so in good shape, that the hall is for those who are chasing fashion or trying to compensate for internal complexes. She could mockingly comment on women working hard on the treadmill, saying that it would be better to spend time on something really worthwhile: a walk in the park, an evening with family, an interesting book. But for 2 months now she has been going to the gym on schedule. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, always at the same time. Always with the same gym bag filled with new tops and leggings that weren't in her wardrobe before. I didn't even notice when she bought them, but now they were part of her life, her habit. She began to carefully monitor her diet. What previously seemed like small joys to her: chocolate after a hard day, cake for tea, a late dinner while watching a TV series, has now disappeared. Containers with proper food, protein bars, vitamin supplements. She drank more water, gave up flour and sugar. It seemed as if someone suddenly switched the switch in it. Of course, I asked. One day, when she was getting ready to go to the gym again, throwing a towel and a bottle of water into her bag, I grinned. Have you decided to become a fitness model? She smiled lightly, almost indifferently, as if I had asked about something insignificant. I just want to be in shape, feel better. Simple, logical words. And I believed it. I believed because I wanted to believe. But at one moment, everything has changed. I couldn't say exactly when. Maybe it was her look a little slow, a little guilty when she received a message on her phone. Maybe too happy, even excited when she said she would be late today. Or maybe it's us, and how our sex life gradually faded away, and I, naive, chalked it up to age, fatigue, routine. We were always close, always found time for each other, even when the years left their mark. But now her touches have become rare, her kisses have become absent-minded, mechanical. She moved away from me in bed, involuntarily shrinking if I tried to pull her closer. I noticed. I noticed how nervous she was when I took her phone, even if I just passed it from the table. Her reaction was too fast: an instant glance, a slight tension in the shoulders, as if I could see something extra. Phone conversations have become shorter. She went into another room, spoke quietly in monosyllables, and interrupted calls if I came in. And her phone screen was increasingly turned down. Once is an accident. Twice is a habit. But when it happens again every day, you begin to see patterns. Something, it clicked in my head. And then I started to notice. small details which previously seemed insignificant. The smell of a new perfume, although she always remained faithful to one. It was as if someone had purposefully placed tiny puzzles, hoping I wouldn't put them together. A single picture. And I could tell myself that this is an accident. If not for one, but. I never believed in accidents. I never thought that drastic changes happen without a reason. Everything has its source, its starting point, even if at first it seems just a coincidence. I decided to check it out. I decided not to wait, not to guess, not to torture myself with guesses. I needed to see everything for myself. So I went to one of her private classes on Friday night. I didn't know what exactly I was hoping to find there. Maybe I wanted to make sure that I was fooling myself, that all this was just her desire for change. Or maybe, on the contrary, he hoped to get an answer to that disturbing question that stuck in his head and did not give him peace. But when I got there, everything fell into place. My name is Henry Thompson. I am 42 years old and live in a small but cozy suburb of Chicago. I have everything that an ordinary American man dreams of: a beautiful wife, a daughter, a nice house with a well-kept lawn, and a stable job that brings me a decent income. At first glance, my life looks perfect, and I myself have always considered myself a happy person. However, as it turns out, happiness is a fragile thing, and one barely noticeable crack is enough for everything around to begin to crumble. I'm an engineer. For more than 15 years, I have been working in a large company developing automated systems. I like my job. It not only pays well, but also gives me a sense of stability. I'm not the kind of person who likes to take risks or go on adventures. I have always valued order and predictability in life, because that is what, in my opinion, makes a person happy. Sometimes it seemed to me that I was a little boring, but at least reliable. I didn't need unexpected twists of fate. I enjoyed the confidence in the future. My day is scheduled minute by minute. In the morning, I get up before everyone else, make coffee, and watch the news. Then I get the kids ready for school and go to the office. During the day, I solve problems, hold meetings, and have lunch in the same cafe not far from work. In the evening, I return home, spend time with my family, help my son with his homework, play with my daughter, and then sit down to watch TV or read a book before bed. Everything goes on as usual, day after day, year after year. It always seemed to me that I was doing everything right. I wasn't perfect, but who among us is? I worked, tried to provide for my family, so that we could have a comfortable home, stability, and confidence in the future. He took care of his daughter, spent time with her, helped her with her studies, taught her to ride a bike, fixed her broken toys, and read to her at night when she was little. I paid attention to my wife, although perhaps not as much as I should have, but I never thought that this might not be enough. Becky and I have lived together for almost half of our lives. We went through adolescence, formation, ups and downs. We survived the first years of marriage, got used to each other, learned to forgive minor insults, and understand each other perfectly. I believed that there were no secrets between us, that we knew each other down to the last character trait, down to the habits that had become an integral part of everyday life. I knew how she drinks coffee always with a drop of milk, but without sugar, how she likes to fall asleep curled up in a ball, how in winter her hands are always cold, and she hides them in the sleeves of my sweater. I used to think that our marriage is something indestructible, like a rock that has withstood storms and years. My wife, Becky, has always been the best woman in the world to me. We met at university and have not been apart since then. She is a caring mother, a wonderful housewife, and, as it always seemed to me, a faithful friend. We were not a perfect couple, but we had a strong union based on respect and love. We went through many difficult periods, the birth of a daughter, moving, financial difficulties, but we always dealt with it together. I was proud of our family and was sure that we would never be among those couples who give up and separate. That's what I thought until recently. I met Becky at university, and from that moment our lives began to intertwine, like two lines tending to one point. It was a time of youth, hope, ambition, when it seemed that the whole world lay before us, full of opportunities and unprecedented roads. I studied at the Faculty of Engineering, immersed in lectures, laboratory work, endless drawings and projects. My schedule was filled to capacity, my days spent doing calculations and my nights spent at the drawing board or in front of the monitor. Becky, on the other hand, was a person from a completely different world. She studied journalism and her life was full of events. Always with a notebook in her hands, always looking for interesting stories, she seemed the embodiment of energy itself, tireless and curious. Her laughter was ringing, her movements were fast, and her gaze was inquisitive, lively, full of light. We met by chance. Completely ridiculous. I remember that autumn day, dank and gray, when the morning began with pouring rain, covering everything with a continuous sheet of water. As usual, I hurried to campus, pulling my head into my shoulders, hiding my face under the hood. Raindrops ran down the fabric of the jacket, boots slid on the wet asphalt. The air smelled of dampness, wet leaves, and something else, the approach of winter, probably. I quickened my pace, heading towards the entrance to the library, and at that very moment someone crashed into me with force. The blow was unexpected, so much so that I could barely stand on my feet. In front of me was a girl soaking wet, with disheveled hair, in a wet sweater that clung to her thin shoulders. Her bag slipped out of her hands, and the next moment books, notebooks, and scribbled sheets scattered across the wet asphalt, instantly soaking in the rain. "Oh no," she exclaimed, immediately kneeling down to collect the scattered things. "I'm so clumsy." I sat down next to her, without hesitation, helping her collect the sheets of paper damaged by the rain. The ink blurred, the letters smeared, turning into illegible lines. She tried to squeeze the edge of one of the pages, but it was no use. "Everything is fine," I said, handing her a stack of saved notebooks, and for the first time I looked at her carefully. Brown eyes, shining with moisture either from the rain or from laughter. Cheeks turned red from the cold. Her lips trembled, but not from the cold, but from the suppressed laughter that was about to escape from her lips. She met my gaze, and at that moment I realized that the rain, the cold, the soaking wet clothes, none of this mattered. "Maybe coffee," she suddenly suggested, shaking drops of water from the sleeve of her sweater and smiling. As a sign of reconciliation, I couldn't help but smile back. This is how our story began. After that rainy day, we began to meet more often. At first, these were random meetings on campus, short conversations between lectures, then shared lunches in the university cafe. We talked about everything, about our favorite books, about the future, about our dreams. Becky always said that she wanted to travel the world, write reports from the most remote corners of the planet. I dreamed of a career as an engineer, of working on projects that could change people's lives. One day, one cool autumn evening, we were sitting on the wide stone steps of the old university building. The wind drove fallen leaves along the path, tossing them, circling in the air, as if playing. They rustled under the feet of rare passers-by. Autumn gradually came into its own, painting the world in warm, but already fading colors. Becky bought hot chocolate in paper cups. Steam rose above the dark liquid, enveloping us with a light, sweetish aroma. She wrapped her hands around her glass, as if trying to absorb the warmth, and pulled herself deeper into her long plaid scarf. "Someday I'll go to Paris," she suddenly said, looking somewhere into the distance, into the sky covered with gray clouds. "I will sit in a small cafe in Montmartre and write articles that will be read by millions." I smiled as I took a sip of my hot chocolate. "And I will build something great," I said. "Maybe a bridge or a skyscraper. Something that will last a long time." She turned to me, her eyes sparkling not from the autumn cold, but from the dream that lived inside her. "Then we need to promise each other that we will not give up on our dreams." She extended her hand to me, and without hesitation I shook it. Her fingers were warm, despite the cool evening, and this gesture, simple, almost childish, suddenly acquired special meaning for us. Time passed, and we became even closer. I realized that Becky was special. She filled my life with light, laughter, and inspiration. I couldn't imagine a single day without her voice, without her jokes, without her sincere faith in me. So our friendship gradually turned into something more. Our relationship developed rapidly, but at the same time naturally. We spent more and more time together, as if the rest of the world was becoming unimportant, only our small, cozy world existed, filled with conversations, laughter, and long walks. It seemed like everything about her was designed to charm me. Her laugh, her habit of tucking her hair behind her ear, her dreamy look when she talked about her plans. I admired her ability to see beauty in little things, to notice what eluded others. Every date was special. We walked around the evening city, hiding from the cool autumn wind in small cafes, drinking hot chocolate and talking about everything. She could talk for hours about the books she read or the reports she dreamed of writing. I listened, catching every word, enjoying the melody of her voice. Sometimes we wandered into bookstores, where she excitedly turned the pages while I watched her concentrated face and smiled. We laughed, argued, discussed films and music, made plans for the future, without even noticing how the hours passed. One winter, we went out to the park after a heavy snowfall. The snow glistened in the light of the lanterns, and the air was fresh and clean. Becky suddenly grabbed a handful of snow and threw a snowball at me, laughing so contagiously that I couldn't resist throwing it back. We rushed along the alleys, forgetting about everything, until we fell into a snowdrift, choking with laughter. She lay next to him, looking at the sky, her cheeks glowing from frost and fun. I looked at her and realized, I'm not just in love. I want this moment to last forever. The first time we were alone in her room was filled with awe that seemed almost tangible. There was a tension in the air, not frightening, but an exciting, sweet anticipation of something new, unknown. I heard my heart beating loudly and clearly, as if it was beating the rhythm of this moment. Becky sat next to me, her eyes sparkled with a soft light, and her fingers carefully slid over my hand, leaving behind a feeling of something warm and tender. She smiled slightly embarrassed, with that timid uncertainty that made her even more beautiful. There were no words between us that evening. They weren't needed. The looks, the touches, the breathing, which either froze or quickened, said everything. For the first time, I felt that the whole world had narrowed to one point, to this moment, to one feeling, to one person. We sat next to each other for a long time, silently, but in this silence there were more than 1,000 conversations. I felt her warmth, her presence, her trust. At some point, she sighed quietly and, with barely a noticeable hesitation, leaned her head on my shoulder. This movement was so natural that I did not immediately realize how close she was now to me, how her hair tickled my neck, how her breath softly touched my skin. I turned my head, meeting her gaze. There was everything in those eyes: excitement, tenderness, sincerity. And before I could say anything, she gently touched my lips with hers. The kiss was light, weightless, as if testing, but there was a quiet confidence in it. And then it grew into something bigger, deeper. Her lips became bolder, and my hands, as if by instinct, slid along her back, pulling her closer. Time ceased to exist, dissolved in this moment, in this new sensation that pulsated in every movement, in every breath. Outside the narrow window, the first snow was falling slowly, silently, as if it was afraid to disturb the magic of what was happening. There was muffled noise in the dormitory corridor, the voices of students, someone's laughter, the sound of doors closing, but all this was far away. We were in our own separate world, where there were only two of us. This evening became the starting point for many events that were to change our lives. Until that moment, we were just a couple in love, dividing our time between lectures, projects, endless conversations, and jokes. But it was on this quiet, snowy evening that our connection reached a new level, a level at which there were no longer divisions, but only she and I, and we were each other's first. That night, pictures of our possible life together seemed to flash before my eyes. How we wake up together, how I prepare morning coffee, and she, yawning, leaves the bedroom with disheveled hair. How we leave for work, chatting about trifles along the way, and in the evening we discuss how our day went. When I held her close to me, I not only felt the warmth of her body, but also heard the quiet beat of my own heart, which echoed the rhythm of her breathing. It seemed to me that at that moment, all my previous dreams about the future were taking on concrete form. We continued to study. I became an engineer, she became a journalist. University was coming to an end, and a new stage was opening up before us: adult, responsible life. Studying required strength, graduation projects, endless reports, conferences, and tests. But now we had incredible motivation. We knew that after graduating from university, we could start living together, without the restrictions of a hostel, neighbors, and strict rules. The first months after our rapprochement flew by in a blur. We were so passionate about each other that we sometimes completely forgot about troubles and difficulties. When I was late in the lab, trying to complete another automation project, Becky would wait for hours for me on a bench near the building, reading some book, and then we would go together to the nearest cafe to drink hot chocolate. Sometimes I felt guilty, because she also had a lot of things to do that required time and effort, but she always smiled and said that she liked just being around. We often laughed that in this story we are so different. I am a person who loves stability and reliability. She is a fountain of ideas, spontaneous and thirsty for change. But as they say, opposites attract. Our closeness, our love served us as a support and a point of balance. We were young, romantic, and were ready to move mountains just to be together. However, life did not stand still. At some point, it became clear that university would soon end, and that we needed to think about the future in more concrete terms. 6 months before graduation, we decided that we would start saving for an apartment, or at least for a small rented studio where we could live together. I was already working part-time at a small engineering firm, helping check calculations and drawings. The pay was modest, but allowed me to save some money for the future. Becky, with her talent for writing, found temporary orders for articles for local online publications. She liked it, and in addition, she received, albeit small, but still income. When the time came to defend our diplomas, we were both terribly nervous. I was preparing a large-scale project to create cost-effective smart home control systems. Then it was still an innovation, and Becky was writing a final paper on journalism of the future, touching on the idea of digital reporting. We supported each other as best we could. On the eve of my defense, she brought me a huge mug of coffee and convinced me that my research was the most interesting and promising that could be invented at the Faculty of Engineering. For my part, I helped her with adjusting some technical details in her work, especially in the section on multimedia formats. We both passed our diplomas with excellent marks, which was our first serious common achievement. I remember how, after the results were announced, we literally jumped out of the university onto the bright area and hugged each other, laughing. I felt her warm hair on my face and whispered, "We did it." At that moment, it seemed to us that all paths were open, and the future was an endless field of possibilities. The graduation, with many photographs and solemn speeches, was also held in a joyful atmosphere. Becky wore an elegant pale blue dress, and I wore a classic black suit. Our parents finally met in person. Before that, they had only seen each other via video calls, and also met each other a couple of times at rare events, and fortunately, they immediately found a common language. We breathed a sigh of relief. After all, this is also an important part of life, the approval of loved ones. Towards the end of summer, we found a small apartment in a multi-story building located near the park. The apartment was cozy, although not too spacious. One bedroom, a living room combined with a kitchen, and a small balcony that barely fit a folding chair and a flower box. But for us, it was a whole castle, our first 4 walls, where we could create our own world. The move became a test of the strength of our young love. For the first time, we were faced with everyday issues, such as choosing wallpaper, buying furniture, and dividing responsibilities. It turns out that I love making plans and to-do lists, while Becky prefers spontaneity and inspiration. At first, this caused some tension. I wanted to know in advance what we would buy and when, and Becky could suddenly change her mind and say that she liked a different model of sofa better. But we have learned to negotiate. Becky agreed that we would create a rough budget, and I learned not to panic if plans suddenly changed. Eventually, our apartment began to take on a finished look. Light yellow walls, shelves with books, pillows on the sofa that Becky sewed herself, and several of her favorite posters with views of Paris and New York. During that period, I found a permanent job in a company that developed automation systems for industrial enterprises. It was something like the initial stage of my future career. The tasks were not too difficult, but I gained valuable experience and had a stable salary. Becky, after graduating from university, got a job at a local newspaper where she wrote short notes and made short reports about the life of the city. She liked to communicate with people, to learn their stories, and I liked to read her articles, which showed through her lively writing style. We were young, optimistic, and in love. Even if we sometimes returned home tired, we tried to share our impressions of the day. Often in the evenings, we cooked dinner together, trying to come up with a new dish. Becky, inspired by various cooking programs, loved to experiment with seasonings and sauces. I was rather responsible for practical issues, cutting vegetables, making sure that something didn't burn. This is how our first years after university went, filled with romance, but also with pressing worries. We traveled within the state, sometimes went to neighboring cities for the weekend, admired the scenery, and, of course, made plans now not only individually, but jointly. One Sunday, when we were walking along the river, I suddenly realized that I did not want to put off an important question any longer. We stood on the observation deck, looking at the slowly flowing water. Becky smiled and talked about her dream of someday going to Europe. I listened to her, but a whole swarm of thoughts was beating inside me. What if now? What if she gets scared? But I realized that I couldn't wait any longer. Becky, I said quietly, looking at her, trying to catch every emotion that flashed in her eyes. We stood on the roof of the old hostel, where we often went up in the evenings to just sit together, watching the lights of the city. Life was noisy below, cars were passing, someone was laughing in the distance, silhouettes were flashing in the windows of neighboring buildings. But for me at that moment only she existed. I know we have only recently gotten back on our feet. We don't yet have a big house, stable savings. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. But it seems to me that this is not the main thing. The main thing is that we have been walking together for so many years. And to be honest, I can't see my life without you. Becky turned to me, her brown eyes widening in surprise. She was silent for a few seconds, and then her gaze softened. Something warm, almost radiant, appeared in it. Do you want to say? Her voice trembled, her breathing became ragged. I stepped closer, feeling my fingers tremble as I searched my pocket for the small velvet box. I want to say that I love you, and that if we wait for ideal circumstances, we may miss the point. I opened the box, showing a modest, but lovingly chosen ring. Marry me, Becky. At that moment, it seemed to me that my heart would just jump out of my chest. I looked at her, catching every movement of her face, every shadow of emotion, afraid to even blink, lest I miss something important. She froze for a moment, looking at the ring, then at me. And then her lips twitched into a smile, and her eyes filled with tears. Of course, yes, she exclaimed. Her voice sounded with a slight trembling, but there was so much joy in it that it suddenly became easier for me to breathe. She rushed towards me, hugging me so tightly that I felt her heart beating wildly next to mine. I hugged her back, inhaling the smell of her hair, feeling the warmth of her hands, and suddenly I realized that it was right. All this was correct. We scheduled the wedding for next spring, deciding that we would have time to calmly prepare and think about everything. Our parents were happy, although they were a little worried because we are still very young and marriage is a big responsibility. But we were full of enthusiasm. Organizing the wedding took several months. Choosing outfits, finding a place for the celebration, decorating the hall, inviting guests. At first, we wanted to have a small ceremony, but it turned out that we both had plenty of relatives and friends, so gradually the list of invitees grew, and with it the scale of the holiday. Becky took charge of designing the invitations and decor and approached it with the same creative passion she brings to her articles. I dealt with the financial side. I figured out how to distribute our modest budget so that the celebration would be memorable, but at the same time we would not be left without a means of living. Our parents helped us, mine financially and hers practically, taking on some of the organizational issues. The wedding day turned out to be sunny and warm, despite the fact that spring in our area can usually be capricious. We decided to hold an outdoor ceremony in a small country restaurant by the lake. White chairs decorated with ribbons, an arch with flowers. There was a festive excitement in the air. Friends, classmates, colleagues from Becky's newspaper, everyone gathered to congratulate us. I still remember how she appeared in her dress, a light train, delicate lace on the shoulders, hair styled in an elegant hairstyle, and that same smile that always made my heart skip a beat. When she walked along the carpet to the music, I felt a lump in my throat. I couldn't believe that this beautiful woman was really going to connect her life with me. We said vows that we came up with ourselves. These were simple but sincere words about how much our love means and how we want to keep it for life. When I put the ring on her, my hand shook, but the joy I felt eclipsed all my worries. Becky was moved to tears, and I gently wiped away her tears before kissing her. The holiday was fun and touching. The guests made toasts, recalled funny stories about us, and joked about our difference in characters. In the evening, when she and I danced to slow music, it seemed to me that the whole world had shrunk to the circle of our hands. She looked at me with eyes full of happiness, and I whispered to her, "I love you." After the wedding, we couldn't go on a long honeymoon because I was on probation at a new job and Becky didn't want to be away from her newspaper for too long. Therefore, we decided to take a short trip just for a week. We went to a small town on the coast to be alone and take a break from the hustle and bustle. Inhaling the salty sea air, we walked along the beach, collected shells, shared in small cafes on the shore, listening to the sound of the waves. This week flew by unnoticed, but gave us a lot of joyful memories. We returned home full of strength and enthusiasm, feeling that we were starting a new chapter of life, no longer as just a couple in love, but as husband and wife. Having returned, we plunged into everyday life, work, bills, daily chores. But now a special mood reigned in our house. However, life loves to present surprises. Around the middle of the second year of marriage, Becky began to notice changes in her health. Morning sickness, unusual fatigue, and a constant desire to take a nap, even during working hours. At first, she chalked it up to the change of season and stress at the newspaper, where a series of reports was being prepared. But when I myself began to notice that in the morning she looked more tired than in the evening, and her appetite changed dramatically, she now avoided the smell of coffee, which she previously adored, and, on the contrary, leaned on fruits, especially citrus fruits, and then we thought about the reasons. Maybe I'm pregnant, I looked at her, trying to hide my slight nervousness, and replied that yes, perhaps it was time to check. Just yesterday we lived in our usual rhythm, but now a completely different perspective opened up before us. The pregnancy test Becky bought at the nearest pharmacy showed two clear lines. It was clear from her face that she was scared and excited at the same time. I also experienced mixed feelings, joy, bewilderment, pride, and trepidation. We talked about children, we planned, but we thought that this would happen a little later when we became stronger in our careers and saved up money for a bigger house. But fate decided otherwise. At the same time, I felt that this was perhaps the most beautiful surprise that the second year of our marriage could give us. We decided not to delay going to the doctor to confirm the test results. On Monday morning, after taking half a day off, we headed to the clinic. The doctor, a slightly stern-looking middle-aged woman, said with a smile that the period was still short, but there was a pregnancy. Hearing her words, Becky closed her eyes and then looked at me with an expression that I will never forget, a mixture of joy, relief, and awe at something unknown and very important. I gently squeezed her hand and whispered, "We can handle this. We are together." Becky's pregnancy, although unplanned, brought an incredible range of feelings into our home. On the one hand, we were happy and were already beginning to fantasize about what our child would be like, who he would be like. On the other hand, we were overwhelmed by the realization that a new huge responsibility was falling on our shoulders, and this was a little scary. However, we felt that this was a blessed time given to us by fate. Every day, Becky's pregnancy became more and more obvious. The first toxicoses, a change in tastes, and fatigue. I tried to support her in everything. I took over cooking dinners even though my culinary skills were rather modest. I helped with cleaning. I tried to ventilate the apartment before she returned so that strong odors did not make her sick. Becky continued to work at the newspaper, but when she was about 5 months pregnant, she realized that it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to cope with the frequent reporting trips, long meetings, and stress. The editor-in-chief was a loyal person and suggested that she move to a more desk role, writing articles from home and going to work only for short meetings. This helped Becky maintain peace of mind and not get completely exhausted before maternity leave. However, by the 7th month, it became clear that even a remote load was decent for a pregnant woman. Becky often complained that her back hurt, her legs were swollen, and sometimes she was overcome by insomnia. I saw that it was no longer easy for her to sit at her laptop, writing reports and correcting texts. And in the end, she decided to go on maternity leave, although she was sad to temporarily interrupt her career. But the main priority now was the health and peace of mind of the unborn baby. We waited for our daughter with special trepidation. We discussed the name for a long time, looking through different options. Becky liked the more modern and rare ones, while I liked the classic ones, which would sound euphonious and feminine. In the end, we settled on the name Emily. It seemed to us gentle and at the same time quite universal. Shortly after Becky went on maternity leave, we finally decided that we needed a bigger apartment. Our one-room apartment, although cozy, was no longer suitable for a full-fledged family with a child. My parents supported us morally and a little financially, and I urgently began to look for more spacious housing. By that time, everything was going smoothly at my job, and Becky was receiving some maternity benefits. We took out a mortgage for a small 2-room apartment in a new area on the outskirts of the city. The place turned out to be very pleasant. There was a park nearby where we planned to walk with the stroller, a shopping center nearby, and the area itself was famous for its tranquility and family atmosphere. Moving, pregnancy in the 7th or 8th month, renovation, all this fell on us at the same time. At first, I was worried that Becky would have a hard time handling the stress. But surprisingly, it was during this period that I discovered incredible strength and perseverance in her. She, of course, was tired, but at the same time she remained optimistic and active. Together, we chose wallpaper for the nursery, ordered furniture that was supposed to arrive several weeks before the expected date of birth. My parents also helped. They came on weekends, brought food, mother-in-law's pies, and my father assembled the purchased furniture. The atmosphere was joyful, and at the same time nervous. We understood that very soon there would be 3 of us, and life would never be the same. Doctors assumed that the birth would occur at the very end of summer. One warm day in August, Becky woke up with contractions. The minute she woke me up in a quiet voice, telling me that her stomach was starting to hurt, and that it seemed it all started, I felt a sharp pang of panic mixed with incredible excitement. We had been prepared for this moment for a long time. The bags to the maternity hospital stood collected at the door, and the car had an almost full tank. But when it came to reality, all my preconceived plans and confidence dissolved. I began to get nervous, hastily putting my keys and phone into my pockets and checking my documents, although everything was in place. Becky, on the contrary, seemed to have found peace. She breathed deeply, tried to joke, despite the pain, and said that everything would work out for us. Nurses met us at the hospital and helped Becky into the room. I was asked to stay in the corridor while she was being processed, and during these few minutes I felt my hands shaking and my palms starting to sweat. The world around me looked unreal, as if I was in a dream. I understood that I was about to become a father, and this realization struck me with a cold wind and warm joy at the same time. The labor lasted almost the entire night. Becky was allowed to give birth next to me. I stood behind her, held her hand, and tried to help her breathe, as we were taught in courses for future parents. My wife suffered greatly from contractions, but she endured it stoically, occasionally biting her lip. Seeing her courage, I felt an unprecedented mixture of gratitude and guilt. I felt there was little I could do to ease her pain. The doctors and nurses acted confidently and calmly, encouraging us. When Becky exhaled her last breath, and I heard our daughter's first cry, my legs gave way. All this time I seemed to be holding back my emotions, But at that moment, I couldn't hold back. I was overwhelmed with a feeling of endless happiness and admiration. Little Emily, tiny and screaming loudly, was wrapped in a warm diaper. I saw her tiny fingers, pink cheeks, and felt the delicate smell of a newborn. I have never felt so strong and vulnerable at the same time. That day, we became parents. Our lives changed in an instant, and I understood that these changes were the most important and wonderful thing that could happen to us. The first days after being discharged from the maternity hospital merged into a whirlpool of new sensations. The baby's cries, sleepless nights, studying instructions for diapers and formula, endless attempts to understand why Emily was crying and how to calm her down. Becky was tired but happy. I tried to take on as many household chores as possible so that she could focus on recovering and caring for the baby. My mom would come over to help with the cooking, and Becky's mom would bring broths and fresh produce. Thanks to their care, we did not get lost in the depths of parental everyday life. Gradually, we settled into a new rhythm. I learned to change diapers, bathe Emily, and put her to sleep on my shoulder, humming lullabies that I had heard from my grandmother as a child. Becky, although on maternity leave, sometimes missed her job and colleagues, but overall was happy to be with our daughter. Every day Emily grew, learned to hold her head up, smile, and reach for toys. We photographed each new achievement and sent pictures to relatives. Our lives centered around this little girl who gave us so much joy. As the years passed, we quietly became accustomed to the role of parents. We celebrated Emily's first birthday with her family and closest friends, a small cake with a candle, an elegant dress, into which she immediately managed to wipe the cream. There was so much laughter and affection. For the first time, we felt like a full-fledged family, in which there was not only a husband and wife, but also a small miracle for which we lived. Everything was going well at my job. My bosses noticed my efforts. I began to participate in larger projects and receive additional bonuses. This allowed us to pay the mortgage and not deny ourselves some pleasures. For example, we bought a larger used car so that it would be convenient to carry a baby stroller and things. Becky, when her daughter was about 2 years old, slowly returned to writing articles, but in a freelance format. She collaborated with a magazine dedicated to the life and development of children, writing short essays and reports on interesting topics. This allowed her to spend a lot of time at home, raising Emily, and at the same time not lose her professional skills. When Emily turned 3 years old and went to kindergarten, a new stage opened for us. I still remember this moment. Becky and I brought our daughter to the group. She was carrying a small backpack with her favorite toy in her hands, and all the time she looked around with curiosity and a little fear. The teacher, a nice woman named Mrs. O'Neill, smiled at us and asked us not to worry, saying that all children are a little nervous at first, but quickly get used to the new environment. We left, and inside I felt as if I was tearing a piece out of my heart. But this was an important step for Emily. She began to make her first friends and learn to communicate in a team. The period when Emily started going to kindergarten coincided with Becky's decision to finally go to work, albeit part-time. She was taken to the editorial office again, but in a different department, where a lot of creative materials were required: articles about city life, family values, interviews with interesting people. Of course, it was difficult to combine motherhood and work, but our grandmothers helped us, who, if necessary, took Emily from kindergarten. In addition, my schedule became a little more flexible, and I could sometimes leave early to take my daughter to dance classes, where she had been going since she was 3.5 years old. Emily turned out to be a very lively girl who loved music and movement, so dancing became a real joy for her. The moment came when we began to feel that our apartment was again becoming cramped. After all, Emily already had mountains of toys, I had a bunch of documentation and drawings, and Becky had books and magazines. We began to think about selling this apartment and moving to a larger house in a quiet suburb so that Emily could have her own yard where she could play and run barefoot. But this was not an easy task. Housing prices were rising, and our savings were not yet sufficiently impressive to take such a large step without risk. We decided to hold off for a couple of years while I got stronger in my career. By the time Emily started primary school, she was 6. I was already a fairly confident specialist. Management entrusted me with managing a small department of automated systems developers. My salary had increased, and we thought it might be the right time to move. The search for new housing took 6 months. We traveled to different areas, discussed options, and in the end, found what we were looking for. It was a pleasant suburb north of Chicago, quiet streets, trees along the road, friendly neighbors. The house itself was not new, but strong, with 3 bedrooms, a living room, and most importantly, a small but cozy courtyard. When we first saw this patch of lawn and maple tree in the backyard, Becky and I looked at each other and knew this was it. The move took place when Emily turned 7. She started second grade that fall, and fortunately, the transition to a new school was smooth, although at first she missed her old friends. The children, however, quickly found a common language, and after a couple of months, she already made new friends. We got used to the new house. On weekends, we worked in the garden, where flowers grew, planted by the previous owners. During the winter, deer would sometimes come into our yard, and Emily would be delighted to watch them through the window. As often happens in an American family, in the first years after moving, we were actively involved in the social life of the area. Becky became involved in the at school and helped organize charity fairs and small school concerts. For my part, I became part of a local community of enthusiastic engineers who met once a month to discuss innovations, share experiences, and simply communicate in an informal setting. Our house often became a place for friendly meetings. We invited neighbors, colleagues, and Emily's friends with their parents. Sometimes we had real barbecue parties in the yard with music, laughter, and lots of children running around the lawns. When Emily turned 10, I noticed that she was starting to become interested in computers, programming, and anything related to technology. Of course, this made me happy. Perhaps she had inherited my passion for engineering. I bought her a small kit for creating simple electronic circuits, and she enthusiastically spent her evenings trying to figure out how LEDs, sensors, and motors work. Becky laughed that we were raising a future inventor, but at the same time, my daughter remained a creative child. She continued to dance and was interested in drawing and singing. We tried not to limit her to only one direction, giving her space to find herself. Meanwhile, Becky's career growth did not stand still. She returned to the editorial office full-time, gradually rising to deputy head of the department. Now she not only wrote articles, but also supervised a team of authors and made decisions about topics and concepts. Of course, this meant that she had less free time, but she received great pleasure from her work, feeling that her texts influenced public opinion and resonated with readers. Our marriage continued to grow stronger. Yes, of course, everyday problems and stress at work sometimes cause tension and quarrels. Looking back on these years, I see that we quarreled most often over trifles, trash that wasn't taken out, forgotten promises, or when one of us stayed late at work and didn't notify the other in time. But we have learned to find compromises. We learned to apologize and listen to each other. Every scandal, if it arose, made us appreciate what we had. We both remembered how our journey began, with a rainy meeting at the library, with the romance of university evenings. We understood too well that love is not only tenderness, but also a willingness to work on relationships, forgive and help each other change for the better. Emily was approaching adolescence, a time that many parents dread. At 13, she became more withdrawn, sometimes hot-tempered, and sometimes organized real boycotts of us when something didn't go the way she wanted. But at the same time, we saw that she remains a loving and vulnerable girl, simply learning to express herself, entering a period when she wants to defend her own opinion. We tried not to put pressure on her, but also not to let her upbringing take its course. For example, they set reasonable rules: the time of returning home, the hours spent at the computer. I remember Becky having long conversations with her, explaining the importance of responsibility and respect for others. I also participated, trying to find a balance between rigor and trust. One summer day, when Emily turned 15, we took a family trip to Colorado. We decided that we all needed a change of scenery, to see the mountains and enjoy nature. This turned out to be an excellent decision. We took a car and went on a small road trip, stopping at roadside cafes and spending the night in cozy hotels. Emily, although she sometimes pretended to be a bored teenager, deep down enjoyed our time together, photographed the landscapes, and joked about our attempts to sign up for local extreme tours. In the end, this trip brought the three of us closer together, returning the feeling of lightness and joy that we sometimes sacrificed in the bustle of everyday life. 2 more years later, when Emily turned 17 and Becky and I were approaching our 18th year of marriage, new worries came into our lives. Our daughter was growing up, already thinking about college, choosing a specialization. She increasingly showed interest in digital technologies and journalism, and seeing how her mother knew how to work with words and how her father knew how to work with engineering, she said that she wanted to find a synthesis of these areas. We were sincerely glad that she was so purposeful, but we understood that she would soon leave her parents' home, and it was a little sad. It was as if we were approaching another life milestone. During this period, our own careers also reached important milestones. I became the head of a department responsible for the development and implementation of a large project to automate production lines for several well-known companies. It was a challenge, but also a great opportunity. Becky, for her part, increasingly received invitations to speak at events and conferences. Her respected experience in journalism and her ability to work in a rapidly changing media landscape made her in demand, not only in her home publishing house, but also at the national level. She traveled to New York a couple of times, where she met with representatives of large media holdings. For both of us, it was a time of internal vacillation. Should we stay in the old place, where everything is familiar, or look for something more? We discussed this, and while we came to the conclusion that we need to appreciate what we have a good job, a beloved home, a growing daughter. The moment came when Emily was about to graduate from school. Her graduation coincided with our 19th year of marriage. I still remember how Becky and I were getting ready for this ceremony, choosing outfits, excitedly discussing how everything would go. Emily wore a pale blue dress, her hair neatly styled, and looked incredibly mature. Seeing her on stage among the graduates, I felt both pride and sadness. Where is that tiny girl who once held my hand while walking into kindergarten? She is now a beautiful young lady with whom our hopes and memories lie. We applauded when she received her certificate, took pictures of her with her peers, and laughed at her school stories. And then we went to her favorite restaurant to celebrate her graduation. There were a lot of jokes, exclamations of, "We are so happy for you," and joint photographs that now adorn photo albums. Soon we were faced with the question of choosing a college for Emily. She applied to several schools, including a prestigious university on the East Coast that specialized in new media and technology. When she received her acceptance letter, she was thrilled, but it also meant she would have to move to another state. It was not an easy decision for Becky and me to send the child so far away, knowing that we would not be able to see each other very often. However, we understood that this step was necessary for her development and future career. We sat down at the table, talked, calculated how much we could help her financially, and ultimately decided to support her. Seeing the gratitude in my daughter's eyes, I realized that this is worth working and trying for. When Emily packed her bags and we took her to the university campus, I couldn't hide my tears. Becky was also touched, although she tried to be a cool mom, saying that everything would be fine and we could talk on the phone often. The daughter assured that she would definitely come for the holidays and even more often if possible. Life has reduced us to the fact that we are left alone in our house. Again, just me and Becky, as once at the beginning of our marriage. But now we have almost 2 decades of a common journey, memories, trials, and joys behind us. Perhaps someone didn't listen to this point because he got bored with all this blah blah, all these memories of student love, wedding, birth of a daughter, and 20 years of married life. Perhaps for some this story is the most ordinary in the world. But not for me. For me, this was my life. Every day, every minute she lives, every smile, every quarrel, every morning and evening together. All this was what I believed in, what I lived for. But now I was standing outside the door of her coach's room, and I heard it. I heard my wife's voice. My wife, my Becky. That voice that was only for me for 20 years. A voice in which tenderness, passion, desire sounded everything that previously belonged only to me. I heard it, but it was no longer mine. Something was breaking inside me. It didn't just hurt, it died, collapsed, and shattered into pieces. It was as if an invisible hand had pierced my chest, torn out my heart, and mercilessly thrown it against the wall. I felt paralyzed. I stood there, unable to move away, unable to leave, unable to bring myself to believe that all this was really happening. I never thought I would find myself in a situation like this. All my life I have avoided sharp turns, unexpected dramas, theatrical tragedies. I built my life logically, consistently, step by step. I created stability, a home, a family. But now, standing in front of that door, listening to everything I believed in crumble, I tried to understand one thing. Where did I go wrong? I stood with my palm resting on the wall so as not to fall. Blood was pounding in my ears, and there was a buzzing in my head, as if I was in a zone of turbulence. I can't say exactly how long I stood there. It may have only been a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. In those moments, I felt as if the air was being pumped out of me, I was being bled dry, and my chest was constricted from a disgusting, bitter, burning mixture of rage and pain. The door creaked. I could hear them turning over on the narrow couch, or maybe they had a blanket thrown over the gym mats. I didn't want to see this picture. The sounds that indicated that Becky had not just become interested in sports were enough for me. I knew that if I went inside now, I would pour out on them everything that a deceived husband is capable of. Maybe I'll pounce on him, but I remained standing. For a moment I closed my eyes, grabbed the doorknob, and stopped. Not now. It's impossible to tolerate, but it's also impossible to see. I heard my own thoughts, they were almost spoken out loud. A moment, and I let go of the handle. In a hurry, but trying not to make noise, he walked away from the door and moved away along the corridor of the fitness center. Nobody noticed me. My heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it was about to burst out. Going outside, I inhaled cold air, which hit my chest painfully. I glanced at my hands, they were shaking, like those of a person who had suffered a severe shock. At some point I thought I might cry, but there were no tears. What was left was emptiness and silent rage. I frantically took out my phone to somehow distract myself from this nightmare, but then I put it back in my pocket. Who could I call? What can I say? None of my acquaintances, friends, or relatives knew what was happening between us, and I myself did not believe that this was possible until the last second. I slowly walked to the car. I sat down in the driver's seat. For some time I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. Not a sound reached me from the gym, but in my head everything sounded like what I heard a minute ago. My stomach clenched as if a knife had been stabbed into me. I understood. At that very moment my life would no longer be the same. God, Becky, how could you? I whispered, hitting the steering wheel with my palm. I didn't start the engine. I sat there, afraid that when I started the car I would just crash into something, because everything was swimming before my eyes. I wanted to scream, but I just silently opened my mouth. Never before have I felt so helpless, and at the same time I felt an indescribable, dark rage that resembled a clot of hot lava inside my chest. I decided to leave without waiting for her. For what? To see her leaving the gym with a smile on her face, like she just had a great workout. I was not ready for the conversation. I was not ready for the scenes. I didn't want to see this person her coach. The only thing I could think about was how to get away from this place as quickly as possible. The journey home took me almost an hour. All that hour I tried not to think, or at least not to think in too much detail, not to draw images in my head. Traffic lights, street signs, and the faces of passers-by flashed by. I mechanically changed lanes from row to row, listened to the signals, but my memory still helpfully slipped me those sounds. I felt like I was going crazy. Finally, I parked at the house. Our house where we have lived for so many years. The house where our little Emily ran, where we set up the holiday tree, where every corner is filled with memories of happy days. And now this same house greeted me somehow alarmingly. The windows were dark, there was a newspaper lying on the porch that I had forgotten to pick up in the morning, and right next to the door a rug and a pair of old shoes were soaked in a rain puddle. I looked at the familiar details and thought, it's still the same, but now nothing can be returned to its previous state. Going inside, I realized that I didn't want to. I couldn't be in the bedroom, in the living room, or anywhere at all. I suddenly felt sick of the very sight of our photographs, in which we smiled, hugging each other. I threw the keys on the cabinet and went into my office. It was one of the smallest rooms in the house, where I usually did work drawings, documentation. I closed the curtains, sat down on a chair, and just stared at the computer screen to drown out my thoughts. Did Becky come home after practice? Don't know. I lost track of time. At some point, I heard her enter. The click of the lock was quiet, but to me it sounded like a shot. Then cautious steps along the corridor, as if she did not want to disturb anyone, as if she was afraid that someone would hear her return. Her presence was felt in the air, filled the house, and this made it unbearably difficult. I sat in my office, immersed in viscous, paralyzing pain. I was shaking with chills not from the cold, but from something else, deeper, penetrating to the very bones. It was as if everything inside was being turned inside out. I heard her moving around the house. The rustle of clothes, muffled sounds, the slight creaking of floorboards, all this at another time would have seemed familiar, even cozy. But now every sound cuts on my nerves. I understood that I simply could not see her now. Not because I was afraid of conversation, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew that if I saw her now, I would lose my temper. I will say so many cruel words, so many bitter, corrosive truths, that there will be no chance of even trying to compromise. But also, what compromise could there be after what happened? I squeezed my temples, trying to somehow relieve the headache. The footsteps stopped at the office door. A few seconds of silence. Then a quiet, careful knock. "Henry, are you there?" Her voice sounded muffled, uncertain. It was as if she was afraid of my answer. It was as if she didn't know what he would be like. I wonder if she had any remorse. Did she know that I saw everything? Or rather, heard everything? I ran my hand over my face, forcing out the words. "Yes, I'm here. Everything is fine. Why don't you come out?" I clenched my fists, feeling a lump of anger and bitterness flaring up in my chest. He answered as calmly as possible, although everything was trembling inside. "My head hurts. Please, Becky, I have no time to talk right now." There was silence for a second. It was as if she was hesitating, wanting to say something else. Then I heard her barely audible, light, almost hopeless sigh. Okay, rest." I closed my eyes. I was shaking with hatred and fear at the same time. It was an amazing cocktail of feelings. I didn't know if I would ever be able to live my old life. But I already knew something for sure. I can't stay with her after what she did. Probably a week or a little more has passed. I continued to get sick. He pretended that he had contracted some kind of severe virus and almost never left his office. I called work, took time off, saying that I needed a short vacation or sick leave. The bosses were understanding, because I had never taken too many days off before. Becky tried to take care of me, brought me tea and pills. I saw her telling me something about her work, that it was a difficult time at the editorial office, that she was worried about our daughter, who came from university for the weekend and noticed my strange behavior. I pretended to feel bad and just nodded. I saw the question in her eyes, but she did not dare to ask directly. "What's the matter? Do you know something? Do you suspect?" And inside me there was a process going on, invisible to others, but inexorable. The process of awareness, coming to terms with the inevitable, accepting what I didn't want to accept. I sat at the computer, peering into the dim light of the screen, methodically, almost mechanically, moving from one legal website to another. Articles, instructions, laws flashed before my eyes. I read about how to arrange everything peacefully, what papers are needed, how property is distributed, how to arrange guardianship, so as not to drag out this process for months of litigation. Every word in these articles hit my nerves. It was painful even just to see the cold, dry formulations. Divorce, division of jointly acquired property. I looked at these words and felt like something inside me was slowly but inexorably breaking. Thoughts were racing. I remembered our first rented corner, the tiny apartment where Becky and I first started living together, putting furniture together piece by piece, saving on every meal, but laughing and dreaming about the future. I remembered the house that we had already bought together, going through hundreds of options, arguing, discussing, choosing curtains, wallpaper, furnishing the nursery for Emily. And now I had to read about how to divide it all. I didn't want scandals, I didn't want scenes, I didn't want public dirt. I didn't need senseless accusations, screaming, or finding out who owes whom more. None of this mattered anymore. Main Emily. She shouldn't suffer because of us. I understood that, no matter what we were like, no matter what decisions we made, she had to continue to live a normal life. Learn, develop, build your future without plunging into our nightmare, without becoming its hostage. I didn't share this pain with anyone. No one knew that an emptiness had opened up inside me, that every day I woke up with a heaviness that was crushing from the inside. Even the parents remained in the dark. I knew Mom would be shocked. She would not be able to simply accept this as a fact. She would try to figure it out, understand, find reasons. Perhaps she would even begin to look for a way to reconcile, persuade me to talk to Becky, to sort out the situation. And if I refused, she would accuse me of being too withdrawn and not giving the marriage a second chance. The father might have reacted differently. He was not a man to get emotional. Most likely, he would have sat down at the table with me, looked me straight in the eye, and calmly said something like, "All families go through crises. Are you sure you're in no hurry? Can't we just talk?" But I knew the answer. There's no turning back. I couldn't even imagine getting into the same bed with her again. How to wake up next to her, hear her breathing, feel her warmth. I couldn't imagine how to hug her, how to touch her skin, how to kiss the lips that someone else had kissed, how to look into her eyes and see in them something that previously belonged only to me, but has now become a stranger. Maybe someone knows how to forgive this, but I don't. I hid behind a fake illness, locked myself in my office, and spent about 10 days there. 10 long, empty days that turned into preparation for the inevitable. I reread legal articles, filled out documents, ran my eyes over dry wording, trying to force myself to think not about pain, but about practical things. I planned everything in advance to avoid unnecessary conversations, hysterics, and protracted proceedings. I didn't want to make a scene, but I didn't want to leave any openings for this agony to last longer than it had to. I was preparing for the decisive step. The hardest part was keeping myself together when Becky walked into the office. Sometimes I noticed anxiety in her gaze, sometimes guilt. She tried to hug me, but I turned away, pretending that I had a fever or "I just drank bitter medicine, I don't want to infect you." She probably didn't fully believe it, but for now she resigned herself to it. Everything seemed to be going as usual. I was ready to make a scene, to say directly, "That's it, I know, it's a divorce, period." But I remembered that the anniversary of our marriage was approaching. 20th, if you count from the wedding itself, or 20-something, if you take into account university times. But we celebrated the official date. And the most ironic thing, we were just planning to have a small family dinner in honor of this event. The daughter promised to come because she would have a free weekend. My parents were also going to come, but I decided that only Emily would come, without a large gathering of relatives. It will be easier. On the day of the anniversary, I got up earlier than usual. Despite the nagging fatigue in my body and the bitterness with which I woke up the last few days, I pretended that I was better. I specifically told Becky that I was feeling a little more energetic and ready to celebrate our date at least a little. She looked happy, or at least she tried to look. There was a slight, almost timid gleam in her eyes, as if she suddenly found hope that everything could be the same as before. As if this was a chance. In the morning she wrote to Emily, asking when she would arrive. I heard her talking to her on the phone, her voice sounding soft, almost worried. "Dad's better. He's ready to sit with us for a while." I heard through the slightly open door. I nodded, confirming her words, and added that I would try to prepare a surprise. And there really was a surprise. An envelope with a neat bow, inside of which were divorce documents, already signed on my part. I watched as Becky set the table. She tried, carefully arranging the plates, straightening the tablecloth, arranging the cutlery perfectly evenly, as if this could restore the usual harmony, as if she could, even for a moment, recreate the atmosphere of those anniversaries that we celebrated before. She placed the flowers that I gave her in the morning in the middle of the table. Roses, they were once her favorites. But even despite this picture, a beautiful set table, candles, wine glasses, I saw how in her eyes there was a futile attempt to return something lost. But there was nothing to return. Emily arrived at lunchtime. When she walked in, her smile was warm and sincere. She hugged her mother, then looked at me, frowning slightly. "Dad, you're pale. Are you sure you're okay?" I nodded, trying to stay calm. "Of course, dear. Everything is fine." I knew what she was feeling. Something was hanging in the air, something invisible, but noticeably tense. We ate and talked about little things. Emily talked about her studies, about the upcoming volunteer program in the summer, about how he wants to try to work part-time during the holidays in order to save up for the trip. She spoke with passion and animation, and I found myself thinking that I didn't want this moment to end. Becky tried to keep the conversation going, and at times even jokes. She looked at me cautiously several times, as if she was trying to figure out if I was really feeling better. "Henry, are you sure you're okay?" she asked again, softer. I smiled as best I could at that moment. "Quite. Let's just spend this evening together." In fact, I was barely able to stop myself from exploding. Seeing our daughter, seeing her cheerfully talking about her university, I felt like I was about to shed tears. I felt sorry for her, sorry for myself, sorry for all those years that we lived as one family. But I've already made my decision, and I couldn't wait any longer. In the evening, as we smoothly moved from the living room to our small but cozy dining room, the air was filled with the soft flickering of candles. Their lights trembled, casting strange shadows on the walls. On the table, in addition to the festive dinner, there was a cake decorated with caramel patterns and berries. Everything looked as if this evening was going to be warm and joyful, as if we really were that happy couple celebrating their anniversary surrounded by love and mutual understanding. Becky smiled, but there was something anxious, barely noticeable in her eyes, as if she was waiting for something, trying to guess my thoughts. Her fingers nervously fiddled with the edge of the napkin, although outwardly she remained calm. I took a deep breath, clutching the same folder with documents in my hands, tied with a neat ribbon and a bow. I felt everything shrinking inside me, but there was nowhere to retreat. I handed her the folder, trying to keep my voice level. "This is for you. Happy anniversary, dear." I deliberately said this coldly, trying not to show the trembling in my voice. Each word had to sound distinctly, like a hammer hitting an anvil. Becky frowned at the folder. A shadow of bewilderment flashed in her eyes, giving way to tense anticipation. Apparently, she was waiting for something else, maybe a decoration, a gift, or at least a card with the usual tender words. But that's definitely not it. Her fingers carefully untied the tape, and when she opened the folder, her face changed. For a few seconds, it seemed as if the blood had drained from her cheeks, leaving a pale, almost painful tint. Her hands trembled, her eyes ran over the lines, jumping from one page to another, until, finally, she realized what exactly she was holding in her hands. She looked up at me, and there was pure, undisguised horror in her gaze. "Henry, what? What is this?" I tilted my head slightly to the side, looking at her with icy calm, which cost me great effort. "Well, you're not stupid, baby." My voice was even, but everything was raging inside. "You yourself understand what it is." A ringing silence hung in the room. I heard the candle wick crackling, crickets chirping monotonously somewhere outside the window, and Becky breathing heavily, unable to take her eyes off the papers in her hands. Emily was sitting opposite me, and I noticed how she looked stunned from me to her mother, trying to grasp the meaning of what was happening. "Dad, what? Some papers?" Her voice sounded wary, alarmed, but not yet aware. I kept my gaze on Becky, her fingers gripping the pages so tightly that the paper was slightly wrinkled. "These are divorce papers," I said dryly, and the room seemed to become colder. Emily froze, her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but didn't know what words to choose. I looked straight into Becky's eyes, and there was no pain or regret left in my gaze, only fatigue and determination. "Be kind and explain it to your daughter yourself." For a few moments, there was deathly silence in the room. The clock ticked, the candle on the cake crackled, and the three of us froze. Becky kept her eyes on the pages. Her eyes were full of tears, and her lips trembled, as if she could not utter a word. Emily jumped up from her chair, looking first at her mother and then at me. "What does divorce mean? Dad, you don't. This is..." "Because of what?" I clenched my fists under the table so hard that my nails cut into my palms. If I had not controlled myself, if I had allowed emotions to overwhelm me, then perhaps I would have said everything that was seething inside. Tell her that her mother is a traitor, that she destroyed our family, that she was with another man. Let him know the truth." These thoughts pounded in my temples, echoed in my ears, and rose to my throat. I wanted to throw out all my pain, but I couldn't. I looked at Emily, our daughter, our pride, our treasure, and realized that I could not. I didn't want to break her heart so sharply, so cruelly. Not at this moment. I swallowed the lump in my throat and, tensing every muscle, squeezed out. "Sorry, honey, but this conversation is between me and your mother." Emily frowned, her eyes darting between me and Becky. She was a smart girl, too smart not to sense that something was wrong. Becky sobbed, her hands curled into a ball in her lap, her lips trembling. "Henry, wait. Let's talk. Alone." Her voice was full of pleas, but I didn't care. I slowly raised my eyes to her. "It's late, Becky." There was no anger or rage in my voice, only coldness, dull fatigue, from which everything inside was compressed. "It will be enough for you to say a few words." Becky stood up so abruptly that the chair creaked on the floor. Her shoulders shook and tears rolled down her cheeks. She frantically tried to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. Emily looked at her with growing concern, her lips trembling slightly and tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Mom, what's going on?" Her voice was quiet, as if she was afraid to hear the answer. Becky clenched her hands into fists, as if she was trying to control herself, but she was shaking. She shook her head, not knowing how to find the words. "Honey, I don't know how to tell you this." "Tell the truth," I said and turned away. "Only the truth." I didn't listen to anything else. He got up from the table, took the keys out of his jacket pocket, and headed towards the exit. I heard my daughter shout after me, "Daddy, come back!" How Becky cried out to God, how something fell from the table. But I didn't turn around. I left, slamming the door loudly, and went to the car. I didn't know where I was going. I only had a desire to escape from this pain, to drown it out with at least something. I drove along the highway out of town, where I knew one place, a diner located on the outskirts, near a gas station. It's pretty dirty, but they serve cheap, strong drinks. I've never been a big drinker, and I didn't even know how to, but now I wanted to forget. When I entered the bar, it was semi-dark. It smelled of fumes and cigarette smoke, although smoking in public places seemed to have been banned for a long time. But here the rules clearly circumvented the laws. I sat down heavily at the bar and asked for whiskey. Then again, and one more thing. I was so immersed in my pain that I didn't notice how I was starting to stagger. The usual thoughts about how I would drive and how dangerous it would be did not occur to me. I had only one desire, to feel the blows of alcohol in order to get the image of my wife with a strange man out of my head. At some point, I must have lost track of time. The bartender was saying something to me, but I only heard a distant cacophony of voices. I think he was asking if I had someone who could pick me up. I wanted to answer, but incomprehensible sounds came out of my mouth. Then I remember the phone rang. I don't know if I was able to pull it out myself or if the bartender found it in my pocket and pressed the button, but I could no longer bring the device to my ear. The next memory is how some voice, perhaps, the bartender said, "Come, he's completely insane here." I closed my eyes and literally fell into darkness. Half forgotten, I dreamed of some heavy images. I saw Becky's arms wrapped around someone else's shoulders, heard her breathing, then saw Emily's face, distorted by tears. It seemed to me that this was hell from which there was no way out. Someone grabbed me by the arms, jerked me up, and I staggered, barely able to stay on my feet. The world around was floating, spinning, as if swirling in a whirlpool, and a throbbing pain was duly pounding in my temples. Through this hum, I suddenly heard a familiar, alarming voice. "Dad, Dad." This voice broke through the cloudy veil that had shrouded my mind. Emily, it was her. There was fear, insistence, and concern in her voice. I forced myself to open my eyes, but everything was blurry before my eyes. The silhouettes trembled and doubled. Her face loomed before me blurry, but unmistakably familiar. A little further away stood a man, apparently a bartender. He shook his head, crossed his arms over his chest, and said with a heavy sigh, "Sorry, young lady, but your father went too far. It's good that you arrived so quickly." Emily nodded nervously. Relief flashed in her eyes, but it was immediately replaced by concern. She hurriedly stepped closer, carefully throwing my arm over her shoulder. "Thank you. I'll take him," she muttered. I tried to say something, but the words got stuck in my throat, stuck together in a lump of drunken unconsciousness. The whole body was filled with leaden weight, and every step was difficult. Emily seemed to put all her strength into me, holding me and guiding me, leading me through the noisy bar room. I felt her shoulders tense under the weight of my body, but she didn't stop, didn't complain, she just squeezed me tighter, stubbornly moving forward. The air outside burned the skin with its coolness. The night wind smelled of dampness and gasoline. The headlights of the cars hurt my eyes, making me wince. We reached the car, obviously hers. The door swung open, and I almost collapsed into the back seat, leaning back heavily. My head shook to the side, and I closed my eyes, no longer thinking about anything except the viscous darkness that was pulling me deeper. I threw up on the way, and luckily Emily managed to park at the side of the road. She patiently supported me and looked for napkins. I heard her burst into tears and mutter, "Dad, why are you doing this to yourself?" But I could not answer. I was at the mercy of alcohol and pain, which mixed inside me into a nightmare cocktail. I woke up in the guest room of my parents' house. It was early dawn, and I had a terrible hangover. My head was buzzing, and there was a bitter taste in my mouth. For several minutes, I could not understand where I was. Then I saw familiar family photographs on the chest of drawers and realized that this was the bedroom where relatives usually stayed. Becky used to sleep here when we first got married and came for the holidays. I heard voices in the next room, muffled but full of fatigue. Parents, Emily. Apparently, they didn't sleep all night. They talked, argued, perhaps tried to find an explanation for what happened. Pain was pounding in my temples, my body was filled with leaden heaviness, and my mouth was dry, as if I had swallowed a handful of sand. I groaned, trying to rise, but every gesture was filled with dull, throbbing fatigue. There was a gentle knock on the door. "Can I come in?" It was the mother's voice, quiet but persistent. I swallowed, cleared my throat, but still answered hoarsely, "Yes." Mom entered quietly, as she always did when she didn't want to disturb. She sat down on the edge of the bed, looked at me carefully, and, without saying a word, carefully placed her palm on my forehead, as if checking if I had a fever. Her eyes were full of anxiety, care, and something else, maybe pain for me. "Henry, son, what's going on?" Her voice sounded soft, but there was so much concern in it that it became even harder for me. "Why did Emily bring you in like this?" she says. She hesitated, as if not daring to say it out loud. "She says you are divorcing Becky." I looked away, feeling my insides shrink. "Ma, I'm sorry," I exhaled. "I'm sorry this happened." I didn't have the strength to explain. There was no strength to chew it all over again, to plunge into pain and betrayal again. It was enough for me that it was already eating away at me from the inside. I saw my mother waiting for at least some explanation, how her lips tremble slightly and her fingers curl into a fist on her knees. But I couldn't. I closed my eyes and, without raising my head, squeezed out, "We're getting a divorce. Dot." There was silence. Dull, heavy, oppressive. I slowly looked up and saw shock in her eyes. She looked at me as if she had seen a terrible wound, one that could no longer be stitched up or cured. "But why?" Her voice broke. "You were such a strong family." I clenched my teeth, closed my eyes, and whispered, "Don't ask anymore, I beg you." I was ashamed in front of her, in front of my father, who probably heard everything in the next room, and in front of my daughter even more. But I didn't have the strength to explain. I was exhausted both physically and mentally. "Okay, in the morning we will have breakfast and talk. Rest for now." She carefully stood up and straightened the blanket. I closed my eyes. Tears flowed down my cheeks, but I couldn't even wipe them away. Later, closer to noon, I finally got up, somehow washed my face, and went out to the kitchen. Emily saw me and rushed to hug me. She was shocked and cried again when she touched me. "Dad, talk to me, explain why the divorce." I just shook my head. "Emily, I can't explain. Sorry, your mom. We can't be together anymore, and that's enough." She tried to ask further, but I cut her off, saying that I would not give any details. I saw the pain in her eyes and understood that perhaps she would never forgive me for this secret. But I couldn't bring myself to tell her the whole truth about my mother's betrayal. How do you say this to your daughter? It's better to let him think that we just stopped loving each other. My parents were at a loss. I saw it in their every look, in every gesture. Mom kept clenching her hands, nervously fiddling with the hem of her cardigan, and father paced around the room, frowning and sighing heavily, as if trying to find the right words. He was always a man of principles, a man who believed that his family could and should be saved at any cost. Finally, he stopped, crossed his arms over his chest, and spoke with the confidence that I have always admired. "Henry, you're making a mistake. Family is sacred. You can't just cross out 20 years of your life. We need to talk, figure it out, find out the reasons. Try to save everything." He spoke firmly, almost in an orderly manner, as once in childhood, when he tried to reason with me, when he taught me to be strong, when he inspired me that a man should not run away from problems, but solve them. But I made my decision a long time ago. I listened to him with half an ear, absent-mindedly looking out the window where dawn was just breaking. The gray sky seemed heavy as stone, and I felt the same squeezed out, empty, broken. Slowly, almost painfully, I shook my head and finally answered. "Believe me, there is no turning back." My voice was quiet, but there was a steely determination in it that was no longer possible to argue against. Knowing me, my father understood that if I had already made a decision, then my firmness could not be broken. In the end, after sighing, they resigned themselves. I stayed with them for several days, came to my senses, pretended that I was absorbed in thoughts about work, just to avoid endless conversations about our divorce. The divorce actually went surprisingly quietly. Perhaps Becky realized that there was no point in resisting, or perhaps she was so tormented by guilt that she did not want to complicate the process. We communicated only through a lawyer and exchanged formal documents. No shouting, no threats, no carving up until there was bloodshed. We sold the house we lived in to split the proceeds, half for me, half for her. I didn't start any disputes because the property was registered in the name of both of us, and in some ways her parents helped us with the mortgage. I moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Becky found another place to live closer to the editorial office. Emily was terribly worried when she learned about our plans, but we promised that her education expenses would not change. Indeed, we both continued to fund her college equally. We didn't talk much at the divorce hearing itself. They simply signed the papers, listened to the judge, and shrugged their shoulders. When everything was finally decided, we stood in the corridor of the courthouse. Becky came up to me and wanted to say something, but I just answered, "We have nothing to talk about." There were tears in her eyes, but I passed by. Every time I saw her face, memories flashed through me. Those sounds, that voice behind the door, and everything inside me was turning over with disgust, resentment, and loss. Time passed. Our first winter apart was hard for me. I felt like a man who had had all the ground pulled out from under him. It was cold and uncomfortable at home. Small rooms, foreign walls, a minimum of things. I worked from morning until late at night, returned home and fell on my bed, occasionally watching TV without any interest. The emptiness that surrounded me was incredible. But at that very moment, I knew that this would be easier than staying in the same house with old memories. Emily texted from time to time, "Dad, how are you?" I assured her that I would always be there for her, and really tried to help her with her studies, with advice, with finances. Sometimes we met in a cafe, or I picked her up at the airport when she flew home for the holidays. But we were no longer that family. 2 years have passed. 2 years during which Becky and I saw each other only a couple of times, mostly at some important events for Emily. She was finishing her bachelor's degree, and we attended her speeches and presentations. Each time I stayed away, Becky tried to come up and say hello, looking modest and sad. But I avoided conversations and got off with neutral phrases. There was a chasm between us, dug by her betrayal. One late evening, I returned from work, tired as usual. I unpacked the grocery bag and put the pizza in the oven. The silence of my apartment was broken by a knock on the door. I was surprised. No one had come without warning for a long time. When I opened it, there was no one there. I just found an envelope on the rug. A standard white envelope with my name handwritten on it. I took it, went inside, and closed the door. To the touch, I felt that there was a sheet of paper inside. No stamps, no address. This means that someone left it personally. When I read the sender's address, or rather, whose name was on the back, I shuddered. It was Becky. Apparently, she herself came, knocked, and left. I felt like everything was shrinking inside. What does she need? Why now? I opened the envelope and took out a handwritten letter. I recognized her neat handwriting. I started shaking when I started reading. "Henry, my dear, my only. I don't know if you will find the strength to read this letter to the end. I don't know if you even want to spend another minute of your life on me. I wouldn't be surprised if you tore up this letter without even looking at its lines. But if you still read, it means that you still have at least a drop of interest in me. Or maybe it's just the pain I caused you. I'm scared to write to you. I doubted for a long time whether it was worth disturbing you, bursting into your life, in which, perhaps, I had no place for a long time. Maybe you have learned to live without me. Maybe you are even happy. And if so, I have no right to interfere with you. I don't want and don't ask for anything, no forgiveness, no return. I just want to say what has been eating me all these 2 years. Henry, I ruined everything. I broke us, our home, our trust. I committed a betrayal for which there is no justification. No matter how I try to explain my actions to myself, no matter how I look for reasons, the only truth is that I acted low, dirty, and vile. I destroyed everything we spent 20 years building. Everything you gave me, everything you put into us. I tried to understand myself. I consulted a psychologist, reread our letters, remembered every little thing, every quarrel, and every reconciliation. I was looking for the moment at which I began to destroy what we had. But Henry, I didn't find the answer. I can't tell you the exact reason. Maybe I'm broken inside. Maybe I was missing something and I was looking for it like a fool, not realizing that I was losing the most important thing. I'm not making excuses. I'm guilty before you and before myself. But the hardest thing is the realization that all this time I loved you. I love you still. I admired you, was proud of you, laughed next to you, argued, was offended, made peace. I didn't pretend, I didn't lie, I didn't play the role of a loving wife. Everything was real. And now this truth is tearing me apart because I crossed it out myself. I see you in my dreams. I see how you laugh, how you pick up our daughter, how you look at me with that warmth that always made my heart skip a beat. And then this look changes, it becomes alien, cold, full of disappointment. And I woke up, and I understand that I deprived myself of all this. Henry, I know you will never forgive me, And how can you forgive this? I'm not even asking for it. Just, just know that I'm sorry. Every day, every hour, every minute. I live with this, and this is a punishment that will be with me for the rest of my life. I don't know what you have now. Have you found someone? Are you happy? If yes, take care of it. Don't let anyone ruin your happiness the way I did. You deserve love, pure and real, and if you have a chance for it, may you have everything that I was once unable to preserve. I am not writing to return anything. I understand there is no return. I just want you to know that I will always love you, even from afar, even if you never say my name again. Thank you for everything, for my daughter, for warmth. For years, that was the happiest of my life, even if I realized it too late. Becky. While I was reading this letter, tears came to my eyes. I could not deny that her words touched some thin string inside, the same one that once sounded from the memories of our youth. But at the same time, with every word, I felt a dull, tired anger growing. Why did she write this now? To get forgiveness, to free herself from guilt, but this doesn't make it any easier for me. She writes that she cannot explain the reason. But there is only one reason. She herself chose this path, chose to betray me. And now she says she's been in love all these years? I wanted to tear the letter right there on the spot, but I kept rereading some lines as if trying to find a hint in them. It was all a mistake, but who cares? Nothing can be changed. We are not together, and we will not be together. Finally, I sat down on a chair, clutching the letter in my hands. My heart was pounding. Her words about the real 20 years, about how she would always love me sounded in my head. Maybe this would be a consolation for some, but not for me. I couldn't bring myself to forgive or forget. I will never be able to accept the fact that she went to another man if she really loved me. Looking back on our 20 years, I saw too many happy moments, too much trust, and now it's all crossed out. Even if I wanted to believe her that it was a one-time mistake, or I don't know how it happened, it wouldn't change anything. I can't live with this burden. And she, apparently, cannot live with the feeling of guilt. So why should I forgive them if they spat on my soul? And at that moment, I stood up, crumpled the letter, and literally tore it to shreds, throwing the pieces into the trash can. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt a little lighter. Could I believe her? Maybe. I once adored her with all my heart, but not now. Not after what she did. I watched as the pieces of her letter slowly fell into the trash can. The sheets, a few minutes ago saturated with her despair, her attempt to reach me, now turned into useless scraps of paper. Love, forgiveness, real feelings. These words crumbled together in torn pieces, dissolved, lost their meaning. They didn't mean anything anymore. Perhaps I was too cruel. Maybe someone would say that I should have found the strength to forgive. What was needed, if not to return the relationship, then at least maintain the friendship, learn to let go. But I couldn't, and didn't want to. There was no sympathy or pity left in me. I felt only a cold emptiness gaping where love for my wife had once lived. She has been a part of my life for 20 years, my woman, my family, but now she doesn't exist. There was a ringing silence in the room that lasted for what felt like an eternity. I automatically looked at the kitchen. There was a sharp smell of burning in the air. The pizza I left in the oven was already burnt, turning into a black crust, and now this smell was eating into the walls, into the furniture, into myself. I silently walked over, turned off the oven, took out the charred box, and threw it in the trash, along with the scraps of the letter. Then he opened the window, letting in the night air. A cool wind rushed into the room and ran over the skin, slightly cooling the hot anger inside. I stood there for a minute, breathing deeply, closing my eyes. Outside the window, life went on as before. Cars drove through the streets, laughter could be heard somewhere, the steps of belated passers-by, neon signs flickered in the distance. The world remained unchanged. But I was already completely alone in this world. I knew there was no turning back, and I didn't want to go back. Of course, there will be memories. Do not burn them, do not throw them away, do not erase them. They will live somewhere deep inside me, in old photographs, in our daughter Emily, in the familiar streets where we once walked together. Perhaps someday, in my later years, I will learn to look at the past differently. I will learn to remember without hatred, without pain. But not now. Now I know one thing. There are things that cannot be forgiven. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.